also ridiculous. Nerdeen Kiswani. And we'll get to the Yemen statement in a second, okay? But Nerdeen Kiswani is a Palestinian activist, okay? And they've been coming after her nonstop. This is also part of the reason why I say point to a single Muslim advocate or activist that hasn't been destroyed by smears. Many of you might be too young to remember this, but Linda Sarsour was the original, okay? Linda Sarsour was one of the founders of the Women's March, and they destroyed her character. They assassinated her character endlessly with unlimited smears. Unlimited smears. Thank you for the 50 gifted subs. Yeah, they came after her so aggressively for knowing the truth about Israel and for saying the truth about Israel. Back then, these groups had a lot more success in undermining people with character assassination. And that actually was able to successfully shut off the conversation. Okay? It's gone now. Those days are beyond us. And yet, as Israel becomes more desperate, Israel's defenders also become more desperate and become more unhinged. Nerdeen Kiswani, like I said, is a Palestinian and the founder of Within Our Lifetimes Palestine. Okay? She's an anti-Zionist. And the New York Times wrote this article because someone tried to assassinate her. And the assassination attempt was thwarted. An official who was briefed on the investigation said Heifler, 26, identified as a member of the JDL, the Jewish Defense League, 613 Brotherhood, a New Jersey-based group founded in 2024 that describes its membership as Jewish warriors fighting back against rising anti-Semitism. Okay? Plot to firebomb Palestinian activist home disrupted by NYPD undercover operation, authorities say. How anti-Semitic of the NYPD, by the way. Yeah. The assassin, Alexander Heifler, spent weeks discussing the plot with an undercover law enforcement official and at one point went to scope out Kiswani's home. He had assembled components for the firebombs to throw, a dozen of them at her home. She's a mother, by the way. Nerdeen is a mother, too. So, unfucking believable. Nerdeen says, late last night, the FBI Joint Terrorism Task Force informed me that a plot against my life that was about to take place and the agents had conducted an operation in Hoboken related to this plot. For months, Zionist organizations like Beitar and politicians like Randy Fine have encouraged violence against my family and me. I will have more to say as additional details come to light. I will not stop speaking up for the people of Palestine. Thank you for your support. Yeah. Nerdeen Kiswani, you have terrorized America and New York for much too long. We have had enough and we will not stop. You hate America, you hate Jews, and we are here and won't be silent. $1,800 to anyone who hands that jihadi a beeper. By the way, this is not new for the JDL. This was the MO of the Jewish Defense League in the 1970s and 1980s as well. Yeah. Nerdeen has gotten more information, says getting more information that they plan to firebomb my home and flee the country. That's exactly what Zionist groups did to Palestinian activist Alex O'Day in the 80s. They didn't face consequences and feel emboldened to continue doing this because they can always escape to Israel. just like that other pedophile did from Las Vegas. Four members of the Jewish Defense League were arrested yesterday in the fire bombings last January 26th of two Manhattan talent booking agencies that handle Soviet artists. Three of the four were linked to both the bombing of the offices of Hurock Concerts, Inc., 1370 Avenue of the Americas, in which one person died of smoke inhalation, and of the Columbia Artist Management, in which no one was injured. The charges were eventually dismissed because two JDL members refused to testify against their comrades. This is in the 70s and in the 80s. For what it's worth, the prime suspects in Odeh's assassination were believed to be affiliated with the JDL as well. It's so unbelievable how much these guys, these Jewish advocacy organizations, get to like foment this kind of Islamophobic hatred unjustifiably. And then, diehard loyalists decide to act on those desires, knowing full well that they can try to successfully do this and have reached success in the past, and then escape to Israel. It's ridiculous. The New York Police Department and federal authorities disrupted what officials describe as a plot by a member of a pro-Israel terrorist organization to assassinate the leader of one of New York's most active pro-Palestinian protest groups, according to officials in court papers. Members of the FBI and police department's Joint Terrorism Task Force notified the activist, Nerdeen Kiswani, and her lawyer late Thursday that an arrest had been made in connection with an imminent attempt on her life, her lawyer and law enforcement officials said. A New Jersey man, Alexander Heifler, 26, was taken into custody after detectives and federal agents searched his Hoboken home and found 8 Molotov cocktails. A police official said Friday that Mr. Heifler was a member of a branch of the Jewish Defense League, a pro-Israel group designated by the FBI as a terrorist organization. Mr. Heifler was charged Friday morning in a 2-count criminal complaint with making and possessing the devices and appeared in federal court in Newark on Friday afternoon. The complaint did not specify a motive for the planned attack, which was laid out in detail. If convicted, Heifler could face up to 20 years in prison. The complaint said the plan had been in the works since at least February, when Mr. Heifler discussed building and using Molotov cocktails for what he described as self-defense on a group video call that included an undercover detective. Prosecutors said in the complaint that Mr. Heifler and the undercover detective met in person the next day, and then twice more in the weeks that followed, including on Thursday when they built the 8 Molotov cocktails together in Mr. Heifler's home. He was arrested shortly thereafter. Mr. Heifler planned to use the device to target Ms. Kiswani, 31, the co-founder of the Pro-Palestinian group within our lifetime, prosecutors said. He was held without bail on Friday after a brief court appearance in which he told the magistrate judge, Stacey D. Adams, that he understood the charges. He did not appear to have any family members or friends with him in court and was represented by a federal public defender. He swayed and fidgeted nervously in his chair, wearing a gray sweatshirt and a black yarmulke that slipped occasionally off his head. The complaint said that components to make the Molotov cocktails had been found in Mr. Heifler's apartment, including a large bottle of Everclear, a liquor with a high alcohol content. While making the weapons, Mr. Heifler told the undercover detective that he planned to throw some of them at cars and at least one directly into Ms. Kiswani's home. Soon after the weapons were made, law enforcement officers executed a federal search warrant of Mr. Heifler's home, which is on a narrow cobblestone street in Hoboken, and which he shares with several roommates. The complaint said Mr. Heifler had originally planned to flee the United States days after the intended attack, but he told the undercover detective that his travel plans had been pushed to the middle of May. Mr. Heifler attended high school near Princeton, New Jersey, and studied computer science at Stevens Institute of Technology in Hoboken, graduating in 2022. He was working as a machine learning engineer, according to his LinkedIn profile. In court, the judge noted that his income was likely too high for him to continue to take advantage of a court-appointed lawyer. A police... That's crazy. A police department official said the investigation began in January when the undercover detective, who was part of the department's intelligence division, first infiltrated a group chat of people in New York and New Jersey area. The New York Police Commissioner Jessica Tisch issued a statement crediting the work of undercover detective, first online and then in person, in exposing and thwarting the attack. This is exactly how our intelligence and counterterrorism operation is designed to work. A sophisticated apparatus built to detect danger early and prevent violence before it reaches our streets, she said. The commissioner did not identify the detective. Governor Kathy Hochul also praised the police, saying on social media that she was grateful to law enforcement for swiftly disrupting this abhorrent plot. Another statement made by Nerdeen 30 minutes ago. As a Palestinian woman, I have faced years of harassment, threats, doxing, and intimidation by Zionist men. They target us in particular, but they will not stop there. They will come for anyone who speaks out. This violent extremist colonial ideology targets Palestinians, especially women and children, to seize our homes, lives, and futures. One of the first major acts of modern terrorism in Palestine was the bombing of the King David Hotel by the Zionist paramilitary group Irgun in 1946, which killed 91 people. Since then, Zionist groups have carried out attacks of terror across the region and the world. They have a history of targeting Palestinians abroad, including the assassination of activist Alex Odeh in the United States, and continue to expand their influence and attacks wherever they operate. They must be stopped. Elected officials or state representatives who work with or support these groups must be investigated. Their rhetoric enables Zionist terrorism. Gaza exposed it to the world, and we must act accordingly. 100%. I've been warning about renewed confidence and an uptick in violence amongst the JDL and various offshoots ever since I first saw the Shai Davide get invited to the link up with the account Jewish Defense Corps a couple years ago on Twitter. Reminder that Kahan's cousin Reuven allegedly hit anti-genocide protesters with his car in 2024, but all charges were dismissed. Yeah, remember we covered that. Yeah, Meir Kahan is who many many people point to when they're talking about like a Nazi, like a Jewish neo-Nazi. Okay? With yet another attempted Kahanish JDL terror attack, reminder that Blinken removed Kahan Chai, a violent organization with the same founder, from the FTO list in 2022. That's true. They did. Remember, I told you they did. Anthony Blinken said, oh, they were nascent, that they don't actually, they're not in operation anymore, so we must remove them from the foreign terrorist organization list. They obviously have not stopped, and they've actually grown in numbers since then. Yeah. May 2022, Biden Blinken tell Congress they're delisting Kahanist movement as a foreign terror org despite concerns by Palestinian rights groups. May 2024, literal member of the Kahan family commits an act of terror with his vehicle in New York. How is this not a bigger scandal? Reuven Kahan, a cousin of the late fascist founder of the Jewish Defense League and the murderous Kahanist movement in occupied Palestine, Meir Kahan, struck a pro-Palestine student with his car in Manhattan. All charges were dismissed, by the way. Here's Zoran Mamdani's statement. Although, Zoran and Nerdeen have duked it out on the timeline quite a bit. He says, last night, an alleged member of the Jewish Defense League, designated by the FBI as a known violent extremist organization, attempted to blow up one of the home of Nerdeen Kiswani in a chilling act of political violence and an apparent assassination plot. The defendant allegedly planned to flee to Israel following the attack. This comes amidst an alarming rise in threats and violence across the country targeting Palestinian human rights advocates. I am thankful for the NYPD and the FBI thwarted this plot, which could have endangered Nerdeen's life and those of other New Yorkers. Let me be clear. We will not tolerate violent extremism in our city. No one should face violence for their political beliefs or their advocacy. I'm relieved that Nerdeen is safe. Our city must meet hate with solidarity and meet fear with an unshakable commitment to justice to one another. Thank you for this important statement. There's never been a New York City mayor willing to call out Jewish extremism for what it is. I also appreciate that you clarified the JDL member planned to flee to Israel. This is an important detail that confirms what I've been thinking. By the way, yeah, here's the head of ADL, Jonathan Greenblatt, caught hanging out with JDL members during the UCLA campus protests. Okay. And not only that, but also Remember that settler fair that was taking place in a synagogue yet again? And there were pro-Palestinian protesters outside of the synagogue protesting, saying, "Let me be clear, we support Hamas here," right? And Zohran Mamdani condemned not the settler fairs, but the protesters who were saying that. On the opposing side of that were Kahanists, the JDL, the Jewish Defense League, an open terrorist organization. Okay, if you abide by the designation of Hamas being a foreign terrorist organization, so are the fucking Kahanists. Of course, Hamas has never actually had an act of terror on U.S. soil. JDL has. Okay? Hamas has never committed an act of terror on U.S. soil. The JDL operates on U.S. soil with impunity, even after being designated as a foreign terror organization. And they were also doing death threats to Zohran, by the way. The Kahanists were saying that they would rape Zohran to death and shit like that. Reminder that everyone who rushed to condemn Palestine protesters in Queens last January protesting a land sale conveniently sidestepped the fact that the JDL was present and threatening to rape people. Now they're responsible for another terror plot. Yeah. It gets to a point, man. I understand the societal pressures, or I wouldn't say sympathetic necessarily, but there's a reason why I don't bring up the Islamophobia angle as much, even though it's far more intense and far more institutionally pervasive, far more institutionally permissible than anti-Semitism actually is. Okay? Anti-Semitism is not institutionally permissible at all. Now, that might change in the future, but for the time being, it doesn't, you get punished for it, right? As a matter of fact, I'll go so far as to say you get punished for it even if you're not being anti-Semitic, but some of these institutions cynically smear you as an anti-Semite, right? But it's just ridiculous. Like, what will it take for people to finally stamp this shit out? What will it take for people to take this seriously? Do pro-Palestinian advocates have to die? It's unbelievable. What began as a routine check triggered by a persistent odor led to an unsettling discovery. A hidden lab operating inside a California warehouse containing dangerous pathogens, including HIV, malaria, and COVID-19 and Ebola. Not in the headline. Police arrested a man named Ori Solomon, a 55-year-old Israeli citizen. Investigators found a cache of weapons and arrested Solomon on federal weapons charges. Yeah, this happened recently as well. Initially, they reported it, I believe, because... is this the same one as the... No, there's a... Yeah, oh, this is also tied to China, yeah. So the lab, or the warehouse, I believe, was owned by a Chinese national or something. So that's why they wrote the initial investigation saying, oh, China's trying to do a terror attack. Turns out the dude who was operating the warehouse, the actual dude in the warehouse, was Israeli. Yeah. An Israeli citizen was arrested in Las Vegas after police found a cache of weapons, lab equipment, and more than 1,000 samples of unknown liquids at a home tied to a widening biosecurity investigation, the Los Angeles Times reports. Ari Solomon, 55, is accused of illegally possessing firearms and improperly disposing of hazardous waste. Authorities said officers in protective gear removed materials from the home, which were consistent with those found in a separate case in California. That investigation began when a foul smell led officials to a warehouse in Reedley, where they discovered a hidden lab containing thousands of biological samples, 1,000 lab mice, and evidence of at least 20 infectious agents, including SARS, hepatitis, and dengue. If you guys remember, by the way, at the UCLA campus protests, they released lab rats. I don't know if it's connected to this, but I do remember that. Do you remember that? At the UCLA campus protests, the pro-Israel terrorists the counter protesters went to the peaceful student encampments and released lab mice from a bag. Prosecutors say Chinese national Xia Beishu ran a scheme from there, importing COVID tests from China and selling them as American made. And a congressional report flagged over 1.3 million in unexplained payments from Chinese banks tied to the operation. Investigators found Xu had listed a Las Vegas house as a bail collateral and called it hundreds of times over the past year, making it a key lead that led police to raid the Sugar Springs Drive property where Ori Solomon was identified as a manager. How much do you think people would have covered the story? Like, because this is the first time you're hearing about it. Story's been around for a couple weeks now, almost a month, and they're re-reporting on it because like the initial suspicion. I remember reading about it in like maybe like 2 months ago. How much you want to bet if this guy was Muslim, it would be in every headline, every article, every news outlet would be covering it, every single one. Just remember that double standard, okay? It's true. It exists. And there is no reason to deny it. Anyway, the group co-founded by Ms. Kiswani has organized countless protests to draw attention to the suffering of Palestinians in Israel's war in Gaza. The organization has become known in New York for its at times inflammatory rhetoric and disruptive tactics, including a demonstration that led the police department to shut down Grand Central Terminal. In a statement to the New York Times, Ms. Kiswani said FBI agents had told her on Thursday night that a plot against my life was about to take place. She added, I will have more to say as additional details come to light. I will not stop speaking up for the people of Palestine. Thank you for your support. Robert Frazier, who was sworn in on Monday as the U.S. Attorney for New Jersey, said there was no threat to the public. We thank our law enforcement partners for this work identifying and removing this potential threat. How is there no threat to the public? That's a whole ass group that he was a part of. Just because he's the only one that is stupid enough to act out on these desires doesn't mean that the group doesn't exist. The JDL is or was a fucking foreign terrorist organization. Ms. Kiswani has drawn the opprobrium of pro-Israel groups for saying she supports the liberation of Palestinian people by any means necessary, including armed resistance. Protesters at events organized by her group sometimes wave the flags of Hamas and Hezbollah. This is the gross side of it, by the way. This is the New York Times, not so subtly, explaining to its readership that maybe she deserves this, okay? Just so you understand. Because you might read this and be like, I don't give a shit. Who cares, right? But this is a way for the New York Times. This is a way journalists do this all the time, okay? This is where the implicit biases come in. This is a way for the New York Times to just like subtly anchor the story around how Nerdeen is not a perfect victim. Okay? A grosser version of this would have been to put this at the top and not bury it, right? So at least they had the decency, if you want to call it that, to not put how much of a rabble rouser Nerdeen is and how much she actually does deserve this kind of incident. The maximum worst version of this is to just like straight up victim blame. I mean, this is a little bit of victim blaming, but like straight up put it in the title, obviously. The group's tactics and its use of certain slogans have led to accusations that it and its members are anti-Semitic. Ms. Kiswani has long denied those accusations, argued that her activism opposes Israel, its policies, and its structure as a Jewish state. A common chant within a lifetime protest is Judaism, yes, Zionism, no. The state of Israel has got to go. But pro-Israel and many Jewish groups have rejected that argument, calling it a smokescreen and saying Zionism is intrinsic to the religious or ethnic identity of many American Jews. Okay, well, that's crazy, and that should change probably. Okay? You know, that's not anyone else's problem but those organizations. You can't have your cake and eat it too, especially when, cat's out of the bag, toothpaste out of the tube. Israel is and they deserve this, by the way, deeply unpopular entity, okay, for its unlimited violence to its neighbors and its unlimited violence and torture regime towards the 6 million Palestinians that it unfortunately currently illegally occupies the lives of, okay? So just running around and consistently saying, well, sorry, this is our thing, this is our religion. Yeah, well, it's no different than fucking, someone who's an ISIS supporter being like, sorry, the Islamic State is a deeply embedded part of my ideology and my identity. You're being quite Islamophobic. Okay? Officially, within our lifetime, is a small membership that may not exceed a few dozen people, but since the war in Gaza began, its reach has grown significantly. Its protests often attract hundreds of people whose marches have closed bridges and stalled traffic in the city's busy streets. When Meta shut down the group's Instagram account in February, just 5 months after the start of the war, it had roughly 180,000 followers. Ms. Kiswani's activism has made her a reviled target for pro-Israel groups. In February, she filed a civil rights lawsuit against one of those groups, Beitar US, which she said had used social media to put bounties on her head. The group had posted about her frequently in years. She also said the group had harassed her in person with beepers, an apparent reference to the Israeli military attack on Lebanon that used exploding pages to kill at least a dozen people and injure thousands more in 2024. In January, New York Attorney General Letitia James announced that Beitar US had agreed to stop what her office decried as widespread persecution of Muslims, Arab, Palestinian, and Jewish New Yorkers who disagreed with its view on the Middle East. She also said the group had agreed to dissolve its New York operations, which run its activities in the United States. Directed by Israel, by the way. Like, it's not even a thing. Like, some of the key figures in this movement are straight up operating out of Israel. Neither the criminal complaint unsealed Friday charging Mr. Heifler nor the law enforcement officials who discussed the investigation suggested that Beitar US or its online activities were connected to the plot on Ms. Kiswani's life. But in her statement on Friday, Ms. Kiswani accused it of being one of the several Zionist organizations that have encouraged violence against my family and me. Yeah, I wonder why she said that. Why are you making it seem like that's a irrelevant factor here? In an email to the Times, Daniel Levy, a spokesman for Beitar US, announced Ms. Kiswani is a supporter of violent revolution and no innocent. He said his organization was not connected to the plot against her life. We, of course, know nothing about this threat and have had zero contact with law enforcement on this issue, he said, before adding, that said, Palestinians are a violent people. What a fucking button to end it on. Just